Look at the pattern. Wars don't end anymore. They freeze. Ukraine, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Sudan. Some burn for years, others for decades. Ceasefires pause them, diplomacy delays them, but they never truly disappear. Instead, they multiply. Today, in 2026, there are over 130 active conflicts on Earth, the highest number since the end of World War II. Military budgets are exploding. Global military expenditure reached $2.63 trillion in 2025, according to IISS. And that's after stripping out one-time emergency aid packages that inflated earlier estimates. European defense budgets grew by 12.6% in a single year. Every major power is rearming simultaneously at a pace not seen in living memory. And 2024 alone saw 152,000 conflict deaths worldwide, with 17 countries recording more than 1,000 deaths each, the worst figure since 1999. In 2025, the number jumped to at least 240,000 deaths, according to ACLED. Now, meanwhile, 98 countries were at least partially involved in some form of conflict beyond their own borders over the past 5 years, up from 59 countries in 2008. Entire regions are slowly becoming permanent battlefields, and the trend is accelerating. This isn't a temporary spike in violence. It's something far more dangerous. The world may be entering a forever war, a period where conflict never truly stops, where peace isn't a destination. It's just a pause between escalations, where the international system that was supposed to prevent catastrophe has lost both the authority and the will to do its job. And if that is true, the global order we've lived under for the last 80 years may already be coming to an end. Here's how it happened, and why the worst still may be ahead. For most of the post-World War II era, the international system had guardrails. The United Nations was built specifically to prevent the kind of systemic collapse that killed somewhere between 70 and 85 million people between 1939 and 1945. Nuclear deterrence made direct great power war too catastrophically costly to seriously contemplate. Institutions, however imperfect, created enough friction in the system to slow the worst impulses of states. And crucially, the world's most powerful nation was broadly committed to maintaining the order that made its own dominance possible. Scholars called this the Long Peace, 80 years without systemic global slaughter by any historical standard. It was a genuine anomaly, not a natural state of affairs, but a constructed one. But peace was never a permanent condition. It was always a political achievement, something built and maintained through deliberate effort, treaty, enforcement, and shared interest in the status quo. The moment that those foundations erode, something else moves into the vacuum left behind. That's precisely what we're watching right now. The UN Security Council recorded its lowest rate of unanimity in decades in 2025. Permanent members used the veto to block action on virtually every major crisis, from Gaza to Ukraine to Sudan. The body designed to stop wars can no longer agree on what a war even is, let alone how to end one. Meanwhile, the three powers most capable of enforcing global stability are all pulling in different directions at the same time. China acts as a rising power seeking freedom from international constraints. Russia acts as a declining power that ignores rules when they become inconvenient. And the United States, under its current posture, is stepping back from the role of global conflict manager that it held for 8 decades, which leaves a vacuum that nobody else either has the capability or the credibility to fill. When the referees leave the field, the game changes fast. The economic cost of all this is almost incomprehensible. The global economic impact of violence reached nearly $20 trillion in 2024, equivalent to roughly 12% of the entire world's GDP. That's money that isn't going back to schools, hospitals, or climate adaptation. It's being absorbed by wars, security apparatus, the reconstruction of infrastructure that gets blown up and rebuilt in an endless cycle. For context, $20 trillion is more than the combined GDP of every country in the world except the United States and China. That's how much violence is costing humanity every single year. And the meter is running faster with every new conflict that ignites. And here's the statistic that should stop you cold. According to the Global Peace Index of 2025, only 9% of conflicts today end in decisive military victory. Just 4% get resolved through negotiation. The rest don't end. they transform into frozen conflicts, proxy standoffs, endless attrition. The successful resolution of armed conflict is now at its lowest point in 50 years. The world has never been worse at stopping the wars that it starts. So, what happens when the system designed to prevent wars can no longer function, and wars themselves no longer have endings built into them? You get 2026. Nowhere is this more visible or more immediately dangerous than in the Middle East. On February 28th of this year, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury and Roaring Lion, massive air and missile campaigns directly targeting the Islamic Republic of Iran. This was not a limited strike. It was a decapitation mission. Nuclear facilities at Natanz and Fordow, ballistic missile production complexes, and at the top of the target list, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei himself. He did not survive. Iran's response came within hours, vast in geography, deliberate in its targets. Within days, Iranian strikes had hit across 8 countries simultaneously. Ballistic missiles struck the outskirts of Jerusalem. Drones hit hotels and shopping districts in Dubai. Missiles intercepted near U.S. military assets in Doha. 9 people were killed in Israel. Kuwait lost 2 Navy soldiers to missile and drone attacks. Bahrain took civilian casualties. Oman's Duqm port was struck. The Persian Gulf was effectively in flames. But the most strategically devastating Iranian move wasn't the missiles. It was the mines. By deploying loitering munitions and smart mines across the Strait of Hormuz, Iran choked off the passage of 1/5 of the entire world's oil trade. The Gulf's 3 major air hubs, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Doha, were simultaneously shut down, straining tens of thousands of passengers and triggering panic across global insurance markets. The cost to shipping routes, energy prices, and regional investment models was immediate and severe. Think about what that means. One conflict, one strategic choke point, and suddenly the price of energy for every household on the planet shifts. That's the architecture of modern war in the Middle East. Not a combined campaign, but a chain reaction with no built-in endpoint. A succession crisis now grips Tehran. A new supreme leader has been installed, but the regime has framed this as a war of survival, with few red lines and one overriding imperative: do not go down without inflicting maximum damage on everyone within reach. The war with Iran is not over. In fact, it's barely begun. Consider what a prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz means at a global level. Roughly 17 million barrels of oil transit that 21-mile-wide passage every day. Everything from Japan fuel imports to European energy reserves run through it. And Iran understands this. The mines in the strait aren't a negotiation tactic. They're a declaration that this conflict will be felt by everyone, everywhere, not just the combatants. Turkey is already repositioning itself as a potential alternative trade corridor. Global shipping insurance rates have spiked to levels that haven't been seen since the early days of the Russia-Ukraine war. The Middle East's role as a stable foundation for global energy markets, a role that it's played for decades, is now openly in question. Because while the world watches the Middle East, a different, or perhaps more instructive war has been grinding away for 4 years in the East, quieter in its devastation, but no less total in its ambitions. Ukraine is now the template for what forever war looks like in practice. Russia launched approximately 55,000 kamikaze drones in 2025 alone, 5 times the volume of the previous year, alongside 60,000 guided aerial bombs and 2,400 missiles. This isn't a war as most people imagine it. There are no dramatic tank breakthroughs, no decisive battles. The front lines in the Donbas barely move. Advances measure in meters, not kilometers, over months of attritional fighting. Instead, this is a war designed to erase a society from the inside out. By early 2026, Ukraine could meet only 60% of its electricity demand, roughly 8.5 gigawatts of generated capacity. 40% of the country's total had been deliberately disabled by Russian strikes targeting the grid from October to mid-January. Frozen pipes, paralyzed heating systems, communities rendered uninhabitable not by explosions, but by cold. Cumulative casualties are projected to reach 2 million by spring of 2026. Over 600,000 people temporarily fled Kiev in January alone. The UN estimates 10.8 million Ukrainians will require humanitarian assistance throughout 2026. Russia's strategy isn't to conquer Ukraine outright. It's to exhaust it, to systematically destroy Ukrainian social cohesion, drain Western resolve, and wait until the support dries up. It's a strategy that requires no military victory, only endurance. Russia is betting it can outlast the West's willingness to pay, supply, and to care. This matters far beyond Ukraine's borders. Russia has been using this war as a live testing ground for hybrid methods it intends to export. GPS jamming across the Baltic states, subsea cable sabotage, cyber attacks on European energy grids. The battlefield in Ukraine is also a laboratory, and the lessons being learned there are being written into the doctrine of every major military power on Earth. That's the blueprint this war is writing for every attrition conflict that follows. You don't need to win, you just need to outlast. But Europe isn't the only continent being redrawn, because while Ukraine dominates the headlines, there's a conflict almost nobody in the West is watching, and it may be the most structurally dangerous escalation of this entire year. Pakistan and Afghanistan are now in open war. This is not a border skirmish. In February of 2026, following Taliban-linked attacks that killed over 1,200 people inside Pakistan during 2025, Islamabad launched its first-ever airstrikes on Afghan urban centers, including the capital, Kabul. The Afghan Taliban responded with a coordinated offensive against Pakistani military positions along the 1,600-mile Durand Line. The Afghan Ministry of Defense claimed to have captured 19 Pakistani military posts and 2 bases. The UN has verified dozens of civilian casualties. In 2025, nearly 1 million Afghans living in Pakistan have been deported or forced to leave the country in the chaos. UNHRC reported 1.7 million left between September of 2023 and December of 2025. Here is why this is so dangerous. Pakistan is a nuclear-armed state in the middle of an economic collapse. Its military spent decades cultivating the Taliban as a strategic asset, and that asset is now attacking them. The Taliban, meanwhile, refused to recognize the Durand Line as a legitimate border, viewing it as a colonial-era line that artificially divided the Pashtun people. So you have a nuclear-armed country at open war with a government that denies the border between them even legally exists. Analysts are also warning that the chaos is creating exactly the kind of territorial vacuum that ISIS and Al-Qaeda have historically exploited to rebuild and expand. And the fighting is escalating. But the most overlooked catastrophes of 2026, they're not in Europe or the Middle East or even South Asia. They're in Africa, operating at a scale that dwarfs almost everything else on this map. Hey, if you found this analysis useful, now would be a good time to subscribe to Fall of Nations. We cover the stories that the mainstream news cycle consistently buries. Let's talk Sudan. The civil war between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces enters its 4th year. Up to 400,000 people have been killed. 15 million have been displaced, making Sudan the world's largest displacement crisis, surpassing Ukraine. Nearly 29 million people, more than half the population of the entire country, face severe food insecurity. The RSF has conducted mass executions in Darfur, weaponized starvation, and systematically blocked humanitarian access to areas that it controls. According to ACLED, the RSF has killed more civilians in 2025 than any other non-state armed group tracked globally. The UN has called for $2.9 billion in emergency funding in 2026 to prevent a catastrophic famine that the Sudanese government continues to downplay for political reasons. The world has largely looked away. Meanwhile, in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, a different catastrophe is unfolding, one directly connected to the smartphone in your pocket. The M23 rebel group, which the United Nations asserts operates under de facto Rwandan military control, now controls the provincial capitals of Goma and Bukavu. Now, this isn't merely territorial, though. M23 has effectively become a parallel state, issuing mining permits and taxing the transport of coltan and tantalum, which are minerals essential to every battery and electronic device manufactured on Earth. They generate at least $800,000 per month from taxes on Rubaya coltan production and trade. Now, these minerals enter Rwanda, they get repackaged and are re-exported as legitimate Rwandan products into global supply chains. The technology supply chain of the developed world runs through a war zone, and almost nobody in that supply chain wants to look too closely at the origin. In desperation, the Congolese government has offered those strategic mining sites to the United States in exchange for strengthening opportunities for cooperation in security, defense, and protection of critical infrastructure. The forever wars of Africa are not separate from the global economy. They are built into its foundation. Zoom out further still. In Myanmar, the junta that seized power in 2021 now controls less than a quarter of the country. The IISS has recorded over 61,000 violent events since the coup. The junta compensates for its shrinking territory by bombing civilian populations from the air. Across the Sahel, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Islamist insurgencies expand faster than any security response can contain them. Climate shocks accelerate displacement and recruitment for armed groups. The French forces that once provided a backstop have been expelled. In Venezuela, U.S. Special Operations captured President Nicolas Maduro in January of 2026. 8 million people remain displaced. The oil infrastructure is in ruins, and the transition is dangerously fragile. In the South China Sea, China continues a gray zone pressure campaign against the Philippines, ramming resupply vessels, water cannoning Coast Guard ships, staying just below the threshold that would trigger the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty. In Haiti, armed gangs control most of Port-au-Prince, functioning as parallel states with territorial ambitions. Criminal groups killed at least 4,384 people between January and September of 2025, according to the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights in Haiti. And then, in what may be the only genuine piece of good news on the map, the United States brokered a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan in late 2025, establishing a new transit corridor. It's been named, without apparent irony, the Trump route for international peace and prosperity. It's the exception that proves the rule. Real peace deals in 2026 are so rare they get named after sitting presidents. So why? Why is this happening? Why, with all the accumulated diplomatic wisdom and institutional architecture of the modern world, are we watching conflict multiply rather than contract? The answer is uncomfortable. Modern war has become easier to sustain than it is to end. Technology is part of it. Cheap drones, satellite intelligence, precision strike systems, encrypted battlefield coordination, armed groups no longer needing conventional militaries to threaten cities or collapse infrastructure. The barrier to sustained organized violence has never been lower. Economics is part of it too. Conflict minerals in Congo, oil leverage in Iran, extortion revenues across the Sahel. Wars generate income for the people running them. When conflict is profitable, the incentive to stop it evaporates. And AI is part of it in ways that should genuinely alarm you. Analysts describe 2026 as a strategic valley, a window of maximum danger as nuclear arms control treaties expire and militaries integrate AI into command structures. Hypersonic weapons have compressed decision windows to under 5 minutes. Increasingly, the analysis of whether to escalate is being partially delegated to systems that cannot be talked down by a phone call and cannot feel the weight of what they're deciding. There's also a fifth factor that rarely gets discussed in geopolitical analysis, but maybe also the most important of all. That's psychology. Entire generations in parts of the world grew up believing that major interstate war belonged to the past, that the institutions built after 1945 had permanently changed the calculus of state power. But history doesn't work that way. Peace isn't a default state that human society returns to on its own. It's an active political project. It requires enforcement, legitimacy, compromise, and a collective memory of what the alternative looks like. And once those elements weaken, war begins to return. Not always as a dramatic rupture, but as a sequence of expectations that accumulate until the expectations become the rule. One intervention, one emergency, one retaliatory strike, one prolonged war of attrition, one failed ceasefire, until the pattern is set. The Global Peace Index of 2025 puts it plainly. Conflict resolution is at its lowest point in 50 years. Not the number of conflicts, but their resolution. The world is getting systematically better at starting wars and categorically worse at ending them. That is the forever war era. Not one catastrophic explosion, but a slow, permanent accumulation of fires that will never quite go out. The Korean War ended in 1953, technically. There has been no peace treaty in over 70 years. The two states still face each other across a demilitarized line, technically still at war. The guns went quiet, but the conflict never resolved. That model, the armed truce, the frozen hostility, the standoff that simply becomes the new normal, it may be the template for what much of the world looks like in 2 decades. Not World War III, but something stranger. A world where catastrophic violence never arrives in one defining moment. It will bleed, quietly and permanently across dozens of countries simultaneously, normalizing itself year by year, conflict by conflict, until the generation that still remembers what sustained peace felt like is simply gone, until war stops becoming news, until it becomes weather. Something is wrong with this world. The barriers between crisis and normality are collapsing. The guardrails built from the wreckage of the most destructive war in human history are buckling under the weight of their own contradictions, and the feedback loop is accelerating. More wars create more refugees. More refugees create more political instability. More instability creates more wars. The pattern being written right now in Ukraine, Iran, Sudan, along the Durand Line, in the South China Sea, may define the next several decades of human history. The question is no longer where the next war will start. That question practically answers itself now. The question is whether the world still knows how to end the ones it already has. Let us know in the comments, is there a way out of the forever war era, or has the pattern already locked in for a generation? And be sure to subscribe to Fall of Nations if you want to keep tracking how this unfolds, because this story is nowhere near over.